What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Today, we've got another rendition of Hey Chris, where we answer questions from our subscribers on subtext, and joining me to give you all the insight is none other than the man himself, Chris Fedor. What up, Chris?
What's going on, Ethan? How are you, man?
Man, I'm doing all right. Have you gotten a chance to enjoy the food scene in Louisiana yet? I miss the food down there.
Yeah, of course, man. I went last night for dinner, and I'm going to go for lunch as soon as we finish this podcast. So I got a couple of recommendations. One of them came from Larry Nance Jr. of the New Orleans Pelicans, who's been here for the last couple of years. So I'm going to take his recommendation and head to that place for lunch. I'm very excited.
What'd you get last night?
Oh, last night I just got short rib and boudin.
Ooh, boudin. Yeah.
Boudin or is it boudin? I'd never know. I just point to it on the menu so that I don't sound like an idiot.
Boudin. Yeah.
Boudin?
Yeah, boudin.
Are you sure? You're notorious for mispronouncing things.
Oh my god. But it's boudin balls. Like you get boudin ball, boudin egg rolls. Yeah. At least when I was in Louisiana, they didn't say no boudin.
I'm gonna look it up. Pronunciation. It's French, though.
Hey man, yeah, that's Louisiana for you, Cajun.
No, I'm saying it's a French word, so I feel like you have to emphasize. Hold on. Pulling up this YouTube video of how to pronounce it. I wonder if it's gonna go over the podcast.
I ain't never hear nobody say boudin when I was in Louisiana.
I didn't say boudin. I said boudin.
Yeah, no, but listen to this. This is what the hold on. This is American pronunciation on Google.
Boudin.
That don't sound right either.
Well, that's Americanized. Hold on. I've got to find this. All right. Nonetheless, I'll
Yeah,
keep
it
looking.
says boudin. So is it boudin or boudin? And a little research suggests boudin isn't really a spelling error, according to a food. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Boudin is the frequently used Texas spelling for boudin, the spicy Cajun version in Louisiana. The spelling has an established history in Cajun East Texas going back to 1965.
Either way, it's delicious. That's what I had last night, and that's what I'll probably have again this afternoon as an appetizer.
And before we even get into the podcast, obviously tonight is a special night for Pete Nance, who is on a
Yes.
two-way with the Cavs, as he'll get to play against his older brother, Larry Nance Jr., the son of Ohio legend Larry Nance. And it's just a full circle moment because all of those guys have wore the wine and gold at some point in their career. And now Larry and Pete will face off for the first time, as it's Pete Nance's first season in the NBA. It's kind of sentimental, don't you think, Chris?
Oh, no doubt about it. It'll be interesting to see if the Cavs are going to make him active tonight and he has an opportunity to share the court at some point with his brother Larry. So it's something that Pete has talked about. It's something that Larry has talked about. It would be really, really special for them to be on the same NBA court together. And obviously for Pete, continuing the family legacy, the Nance family legacy of being a member of the Cleveland Cavaliers is very, very special, as he's termed it multiple times in conversations with me. It's a dream come true. So it's such a cool side story tonight. I do hope that Pete gets an opportunity. The basketball purist in me hopes that Pete gets an opportunity to play at some point tonight. Just see the court in some kind of meaningful action at the same time that Larry is out there, because that would just make the story even more special.
Okay, Chris, I have to do this because I've been doing research while you've been talking. I looked it up on Louisiana food website, Explore Louisiana. It says, "How do I say boudin?" And the actual word is boudin. Is the authentically Cajun item is pronounced boudin, but we know it's an unusual word. If you're afraid of getting tongue tied, just ask for a link. We'll know what you mean.
I'm pulling up the YouTube pronunciation right now.
I-
English with Julian. Julian Miguel. He's French.
Videos here on YouTube, and we are looking at how to pronounce this French word, meaning blood sausage or black pudding. We're going to be looking at how it is said in French and how to say it in English as well. For reference, in France, it is said as boudin.
Oh,
Let's go.
okay,
Let's
good to
go.
know. There we go.
I gotta get one right, Chris. You know I mess up all the time.
I
Gotta
know,
take it
right?
out in editing, and but this is staying in there. We're keeping this entire thing in there because people
Yo,
gotta
man,
know. I mean, people gotta know, man. All right, so
English with Julian doesn't lie.
hey, man, I looked on like
This
three
is
different
actually
websites.
hilarious too that we're talking about pronunciation and stuff because a few years ago, when Tristan Thompson was here with the Cavs still at the time, and it was when Darius was very, very early in his career, and it's before Tristan went to Boston and then he went to Los Angeles and Chicago and all these different stops. Him and I had an argument in the locker room about how to pronounce acai, right?
That's a hard
You
one.
know what that is. You
Yeah,
know what
that's
that is,
I know
right?
what that is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Tristan is obsessed with acai bowls. Obsessed with them. Loves eating them. After games, breakfast. They're very, very good. And there was a chef for the Cavs that made these delicious looking acai bowls. And Tristan was like, "Yo, can you go get me one of those acai bowls?"
Oh no.
And I said, "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" And he was like, "Acai bowls." I said, "Nah, man, that's acai." He was like, BS. He actually said the word. He said, "I was in Brazil recently and I was eating those every single day. And that's how I was ordering them. And that's how they were saying it." I said, "No, absolutely not. You are making that up. Nobody calls them acai bowls. They're acai bowls." And I went to YouTube and I pulled up somebody else, not English with Julian. It might have been like English with Eve or something like that. And I pulled up the definition and the pronunciation of acai bowls and I played it for him. And he was like, "Oh my God, I've been saying it wrong for my whole life."
Tristan. Speaking of Tristan, before we get into the podcast, Chris, and I feel like we've done so much before we get into these subscriber questions, but Tristan,
We're already into the podcast. You mean
what?
before we get into the segment?
Yes, before we get into the questions, you know what I mean. Tristan Thompson, last game tonight is his final game he has to miss of his suspension and is eligible to return in Houston. Can you talk about how he was acting at shoot around today? And also, it's his 33rd birthday.
It is. Yeah, he was very bouncy, very energetic, very joyful. You can tell that he's itching to come back. And it's been interesting, Ethan, because every road shoot around that the Cavs have had during Tristan's absence, he's been very vocal. He's been very present. He's able to be around the team. And he always hangs with Darius Garland, either rebounding for Darius, setting screens for Darius to simulate pick and rolls, pick and pops, things like that. So he's trying to do everything that he can do behind the scenes to stay sharp, stay in rhythm, stay engaged with the team, keep his conditioning up. But he was very, very lively today, more so than he has been during road shoot arounds. And I think part of it, obviously, is him turning 33. I wished him happy birthday. He was very pumped about it, that I knew that it was his birthday. And the other part of it is his return is coming and he's itching to get back out there and help this team on the court as much as he possibly can.
And with that, we are ready to get into the subtext questions. So, Chris,
Okay,
are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. This one, the first one, comes from a subscriber in San Francisco. Hey, Chris, question. Many fans and some media have been highly critical of JB. You and Ethan are around the team a bunch. Do you sense any frustration amongst the players? Is there any risk that he loses players' attention heading into the playoffs?
I think you just have to look at how they've performed and how they've stayed together and how they have stayed believing, despite the fact that they've dealt with a lot throughout the course of the season. That's a big part of what a coach's job is in the NBA. It goes beyond X's and O's, goes beyond schemes, goes beyond tactics, goes beyond rotations, in-game substitutions, and timeouts. It's about managing personalities. It's about managing the grind of a season. It's about getting guys to buy into your system and believe in the things that you're doing at both ends of the floor. And I sense a buy in from this team. Look, are there times where there's some frustration with a play call not working, an ATO not being as sharp as it needs to be, substitution patterns, a lack of minutes for certain guys. Of course, that's going to happen throughout the course of an 82 game season. But I don't sense that the Cavs have given up on JB Bickerstaff the way that the Milwaukee Bucks did with Adrian Griffin early in the season. I don't sense that at all. If they have an early flameout in the first round of the playoffs where JB gets outcoached by whoever it is on the other side, then I think it's going to raise questions from players naturally about, is this the right guy to take us as far as we want to go? Is this the right guy, the right tactician, the right guy when it comes to X's and O's to help us take the next step that we need to take as an organization? But just look at the way that they have played. Look at the way that they have come together. Look at the fact that they're one of the top 3 teams in the Eastern Conference, despite the fact that they've missed Darius Garland for stretches. Donovan Mitchell's no longer end of season eligible for awards because he's missed so much time. Karis LeVert. So yeah, I mean, I think there are natural eye rolls throughout the course of a game when things don't go well and when players think that maybe something else could be done. But I don't think this is a group that has given up on JB Bickerstaff or won't play for him.
Yeah, and you get to see like these guys are very confident in one another, and that's the biggest thing for me is seeing these guys understand that they are missing so many guys that are integral to this team, and you see that they understand how difficult it is to create lineups, create rotations without said guys being around, and it's hard for a coach to juggle all of these things. And like Chris says, it's more than just coaching, it's the personalities and those of that nature. And we're going to get into why some players might get playing time at the end of games, even if they're not having as good performances. And that's one of the questions on here, but we'll get into that later. But the next question, with all the players injured right now, is there any sign that the Cavs could sign a buyout player who can play the 3 or the 4? This subtexter says he's desperate for some Tony Snell, Chris.
Oh, Tony Snell? No, I can't. See, that's the thing, Ethan. The Cavs don't have to be desperate. They believe in their depth. They believe in their roster. They have a hard enough time when close to full strength to find minutes for everybody that deserves them and everybody that has already earned them. So you're talking about somebody coming in end of March, middle of March, trying to earn trust from JB Bickerstaff and trying to do the things necessary to show that they belong in the rotation or they should get playoff minutes or something along those lines. There are so many things involved with bringing in somebody off the buyout market. It's relocating that person's family. It's integrating them into the fabric of the team. It's them understanding whatever role they're going to be placed in and accept that particular role. It's somebody who's not going to ruffle feathers and he's going to fit in the locker room. And it's just not as easy as saying, well, we're going to go out and sign somebody because we need an insurance policy or we need depth. It just goes beyond that. So the guy that I've looked toward for a few different reasons, and the guy that I've asked a lot of people around the NBA about is Joe Harris. He has familiarity with this organization. The organization has familiarity with him, his personality, his play style. That one makes sense just because of the relationship, the previous relationship, and there aren't as much uncertainties with signing a guy like that. But is he going to come in here and make any kind of impact? No, I certainly don't think so. Just like Danny Green. And it was a different situation last year for Danny Green. Like the Cavs theoretically needed more of what Danny Green brought to the table, and they still couldn't find a way to get him minutes, especially in the playoffs, at least consistently. And that team last year wasn't as deep, wasn't as talented, didn't have guys step up the way that Craig Porter Jr. did with injuries and the way that Sam Merrill did with injuries. So I just don't think the Cavs are desperate to do anything along those lines. And I don't think they need to be desperate based on the roster construction that they already have. The other thing is there were a couple of guys that the Cavs, I know, Ethan, according to sources, were monitoring as potential buyout targets. They didn't get bought out. One of them was Davis Bertans from the Charlotte Hornets. He would have made sense theoretically, a floor spacer, an outside shooter, somebody that can give you insurance in case George Niang doesn't play well or he gets played off the floor because of his defense. But Davis Bertans did not get bought out by the deadline. So he is not, even if he gets bought out at this point, which it doesn't look like it's going to happen, he isn't playoff eligible. I think it was a thin market to begin with. I don't think the Cavs were that enamored with any of the options out there. And I just think they believe more in this group. Now, look, if something happens between now and the end of the regular season where they have an injury, it's more significant, it's going to cost somebody playoff time, then I think the Cavs continue to explore it as a possibility. But I don't think they're in any rush to do that right now because there just like isn't a specific name out there that makes all that much sense from an on-court standpoint and an off-court standpoint.
And I think another thing that we have to mention is I know Tristan Thompson is a 5. He is a center, but he obviously can be moved to that 4 spot if necessary in a pinch.
Uh,
In a
I mean,
pinch?
I guess
I mean,
depending on
they put a lineup together with Jared Allen and Damian Jones on the court at one point this past week.
yeah, out of necessity because they
Right.
didn't have
And that's
any
what I'm
other
saying.
option.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's going to be a normal rotation or lineup. I'm saying in a pinch. And also, the other thing is the reason that they've struggled in the paint sometimes is when they had to have Damian Jones in there and he's not been acclimated. Obviously, he's gotten more comfortable with that role. But now that Tristan Thompson is coming back and won't need a ramp up period, you'll have him in the paint back holding things down, asserting his dominance in those different ways. So I don't think, and that's the other thing, like the chemistry that we've talked about, the joy that we've talked about a lot with this team would be different if they just added a random player that hasn't been with them the entire time. You see, like Chris mentioned, Darius Garland and Tristan Thompson have been working together and been around each other a lot, even when Tristan's been on the suspension. So there's no love lost for any of the guys that they've had on this team because they've been through it together. And I think that's the biggest thing. So you don't want to mess up what you already got. And that's what the Cavs were thinking at the trade deadline. And I think that's still what they're thinking now. So the next question that I kind of foreshadowed a little bit earlier is, should Darius Garland be benched for the last 2 minutes of the game? I think this question should have added if he's underperforming. But I mean, so Darius Garland to me has had good stretches and bad stretches of games against different opponents in the latter half of games. We look at the most recent game where he had a lob to Jared Allen that ended up being a turnover, and that was not on Darius Garland, right? But I've also said in previous podcasts that I haven't liked how Darius Garland has played in the last 2 minutes of a game at some points. And I've also been someone that said that if he's not performing to the level that we know him to be at the end of the game, that maybe it is an option to sit him down. But Chris made a very, very good point the other day that I'm going to reiterate now. It is not about the game today or the game in March. It is about having him have confidence going into the playoffs, knowing that the Cavs have trust and confidence in him to be the late game performer. Because obviously, when Donovan Mitchell comes back, whenever that is, he is going to have a lot of attention on him already in the closing minutes. So there's going to be opportunities for Darius Garland, like we saw earlier in the season when he got a kick out in the corner and came up a little bit short. But those opportunities need to be available to him so that he has confidence when in the playoffs to be able to make those chances come through.
Yeah, and he just needs to be more comfortable in those situations. And I think the best way for Darius to get more comfortable is to be in them more frequently. And sometimes you learn through failure, sometimes you learn through success. It's different for every person, but you need experience in those situations. Pressure packed moments, meaningful games, meaningful high caliber opponents so that you can understand the level of attention to detail, so that you can understand the level of focus, so that you can understand the importance of valuing every single possession. And I know Darius, in some ways, he's a young kid still. And in other ways, he does have experience in the NBA, but I don't think he has a ton of experience as the alpha in those situations in meaningful games. Last year was his first ever playoff series in the NBA. So he had to go through that. He had to feel it in a different kind of way. He had to see what it was like. He had to understand it at a different level. And I think the Cavs need to continue to put him in those situations where he's going to succeed or fail. Look, when Donovan Mitchell is out there on the court, he's going to be the late game alpha. He is the bona fide closer, but there are going to be other times that teams are going to try and take the ball out of the hands of Donovan Mitchell. They're going to send two at him. And then he's going to have to get off the ball and get it to his teammates and trust his teammates. And then Darius is potentially going to be able to work in a 4-on-3 situation where he becomes the secondary playmaker, and it's up to him to make that decision. It's up to him to find those passing lanes or take the shot himself. So I think there's a bigger picture in play here for the Cavs. There's always been a bigger picture in play for the Cavs. And I think putting Darius in those situations as much as possible ahead of the playoffs is going to be beneficial for the Cavs when they do get to the playoffs. I don't think it would be beneficial to the development of Darius and to the team as a whole to sit Darius in the final 3 minutes of games because he doesn't have it going or something along those lines.
Yeah, and one of the other subtexters and subscribers sent a tweet by the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Guys on Twitter that actually gave out the stats breaking down since February 28th, the double OT game versus Chicago, when he basically assumed the role of the league closer. And I mean, these numbers, I mean, I get why people are concerned, but like we said, it's a bigger picture thing. So I'm going to rattle these off really quickly. So in the first quarter, he has basically 6 points per game, 43% field goal percentage, 44% 3-point percentage, 2.4 assists, and 0.9 turnovers. In the second quarter, he averaging 7 points per game, 54% from the field, 65% from three, 2 assists per game, and 0.3 turnovers. Third quarter, 5.6 points per game, 47 field goal percentage, 53 3-point percentage, 2.1 assists per game, and 0.6 turnovers. Fourth quarter, it drops down to 2.9 points per game, 27% field goal percentage, 29% 3-point percentage, 1 assist, and 1.1 turnovers. And in clutch performances, it's in clutch time, it's 1.8 points per game, 21% field goal percentage, 17% from 3, 0.2 assists, and 0.7 turnovers. Obviously, there is a drop off there.
He's never been a great player in terms of clutch situations. That has never been a strength of his.
But I wanted to rattle that off to give the fans some reason to why you can be correct in the fact that you think that Darius has struggled in fourth quarter and late game situations, but there are more things involved than just how he's playing now and how he can be playing when it actually matters for the Cavs.
Look, that's also why they have Donovan Mitchell. It's one of the reasons why he was so appealing for them to go out and get a couple of off seasons ago, because he is better in those situations. He's thrived more in those situations. So it takes the pressure off of Darius Garland. It takes him out of that late game alpha role that he clearly isn't as comfortable in. He hasn't been as comfortable in throughout the course of his career. And that's why in late game situations, you're going to see Donovan with the ball in his hands. You're going to see Donovan as the primary initiator and then dictating terms as much as he possibly can. And then it's up to the defense to make a decision. And if they send a second body at Donovan, like some teams are going to, then it's going to be up to the other guys. It's going to be up to Donovan to make the proper play when that happens. And it's going to be up to the other guys to step up in a different kind of situation.
All right, Chris, I got two more for you before we take a break.
All right,
First
sounds
one.
good.
Is there any
I'm gonna get some
update?
lunch. Jeez.
Hey man, we went 40 minutes last time. It didn't feel like we were having too much fun at the beginning. We got work to do. Any update on the development of Luke Travers and Khalifa Diop?
Yeah, you know what? The Cavs have checked in on both of those guys, and obviously they like them. They've invested in them. Luke Travers is playing alongside Matthew Dellavedova, and Luke had a really, really good game the other day. His numbers were out there on social media, and he's the kind of guy who does a lot of things well, and the Cavs are keeping tabs on him. And I wouldn't be surprised if down the road they explore that as a possibility. I wouldn't be surprised if down the road Luke is somebody that wants to come to the NBA. got good size, got good instincts, understands how to play the game, kind of stuffs the stat sheet a little bit. I don't know for sure that he's an NBA player, but I would like to see down the road because the theoretical idea of him is intriguing. And Khalifa Job is probably a little bit further behind in his growth and his development and just like his experience in high level basketball overseas. I think we have to keep it in perspective. Number one, these were 2 second-round picks. Number two, they were both draft and stash guys. But I think there's possibly a future for somebody like Luke Travers. I think he has the ability down the road to at least be somebody who provides depth and basketball intellect coming off the bench as, the 10th, 11th, 12th guy in a rotation.
All right. And the last one before we take a break, Chris. Assuming everyone is healthy, what do you think JB's full rotation will be for the playoffs? I don't think it's changed since we made it the last time. What do you think, Chris?
There are two big debates that I think JB is going to have when it comes to a 7 game playoff series. And I think it's important to point out that his adjustments are going to have to come quicker. And what is in game one is not necessarily going to be in game two, in game three. He's going to give guys an opportunity to succeed or fail. And then he's going to make adjustments as the series goes on. So I don't think it's going to be static. I think going into it, the two big questions that JB is going to have is one, how much can I play Jared Allen and Evan Mobley together? And how much do I have to split them up throughout the course of the game? Two, if Evan is struggling with the playoff speed, the playoff intensity, the playoff physicality, how much do I lean on Tristan Thompson? How much do I give him in terms of meaningful minutes in a 7 game series? Because he's been there, done that. Because he brings a level of physical maturity that Evan Mobley doesn't, even Jared Allen doesn't at this point in his career. And there's a level of understanding that Tristan has when it comes to playoff basketball. The second question, because those were under the same umbrella, is George Niang versus Dean Wade. The numbers say that the Cavs have been a more effective team with Dean Wade on the floor. All the deeper analytics, all the counting numbers, really. If Dean is going to shoot the ball at the same kind of level as George, if he's going to be the same kind of offensive threat in terms of the attention that he commands from a defense, the spacing that he provides, Dean is clearly a better defender. Dean is clearly a better rebounder. The team rebounds better with him on the floor, even if his numbers aren't that good individually. And he can guard more positions than George can. Brings a level of versatility on the defensive end of the floor that George does not. However, the playoffs are different, right? George has done that. George has seen things that Dean has not seen. There's a level of composure. There's a level of understanding. There's a level of stability that George could theoretically bring to the team in the playoffs. There's a reason why they brought him here. The tenacity, the energy, the edge that he plays with. But behind Tristan Thompson, George Niang is one of the most playoff experienced players that they have. So how much does that weigh into JB's decision making? How much trust does that earn George? Those are the two things that I'm going to be watching. Beyond that, you know the other names. Darius, Donovan, Max Strus, Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, Isaac Okoro, Sam Merrill as a specialist coming off the bench to help the offense if it needs a jolt. Sam Merrill coming off the bench if they need more three-point shooting, if they need more floor spacing. But I could see JB cutting it down from 9 to 8 consistently. And then the 8th guy is going to be based on what do the Cavs need on that given night? What is best for whatever matchup it is? What does the opponent have when it comes to personnel? And how are the Cavs' decisions going to be influenced based on that? The top 7 are going to be Karis LeVert and Isaac Okoro, the first two off the bench. And then it's George or Dean. Then it's what do we do with Tristan Thompson? What do we do with Sam Merrill? Can we put Craig Porter Jr. out there as another ball handler? But again, I just don't think it's going to be, well, this is what we did game one, so we're going to do it game two, game three, game four. If you look back at the Knicks series last year, JB constantly made changes, both during games and between games. And he's going to have to do that again.
Yeah, Chris, and you think about what you said, the leadership and the playoff experience. I think you start with the young guys, giving them an opportunity to shine and take on that playoff atmosphere wherever it may be, and we'll get to that later in the podcast. But if something isn't going right, you lean on experience. I feel like every team does that. You lean on the experience that players have, and George Niang and Tristan Thompson have the most experience. And also, they bring nearly the same that some of these other guys do on the court. And that's why they're so interchangeable. And we've seen that with the injuries. And that's what makes this Cavs team so difficult because of the depth and the opportunities that all of these guys have had this season to create the confidence that not a lot of bench players get when they're down the line on the bench most of the season, only get 5 to 10 minutes a game.
And
It's
here's
not.
the other thing, too. The other thing that we saw in the Knicks series, the thing that we see around the NBA constantly, the thing that's going to happen when the Cavs get into the first round playoff series against whatever opponent it is. Donovan Mitchell is going to play close to 45 minutes. Darius Garland's probably going to play close to 45 minutes. And Jared Allen's going to play close to 45 minutes. Darius might be a little bit under that, depending on how he's playing, depending on how much of a rhythm he gets in going into the playoffs, depending how he plays down the stretch. But those are the three guys that JB leaned on the most heavily in the series against the Knicks. Those are the three guys that he's going to lean on the most heavily in the first round of the playoffs as well. Max Strus is going to get a whole bunch of minutes, provided that he's bringing the things to the offensive end of the floor and not getting picked on defense as well. But Jarrett, Donovan, Darius are going to play big minutes. That's one of the things that happened last year. It's going to happen again. So it's not like there are a ton of other minutes to go around when you have your top guys getting that kind of workload.
All right, Chris, now that we've gone through some of the subtext questions, I think it's
Some of
time.
them,
Yeah, some of them. We got a couple
geez, I thought
more.
that was it.
No, that's a break. It's a break time. It's break time. And when we come back, we'll get into the last couple subtext questions. I kept it short, but the last couple are more fun and a little bit more detail oriented. But before then, become a Cavs insider and interact with me and Chris by subscribing to Subtext. If you want to give us your questions for next week's episode of Hey Chris, this is the way to do it. To do so, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from Chris and me. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. These are the final few questions from our subtexters. And we got the first one being, hey Chris, is there a timetable for the return of the three injured starters? And Chris, I want to point this out. Cavs social media might have gave something away because when they posted their little video about what songs the players were listening to, the first two players on the plane that they interviewed were Donovan Mitchell and Max Strus. Those two guys did not travel to Atlanta, at least, with the Cavs when they went there to face the Hawks last week. This is a good sign because obviously the team plane isn't going to go fly back and get any players during these road trip series. But them being on these trips could potentially mean that these players are trying to get back on the court. And I know you saw Donovan Mitchell at shoot around earlier today. Do you have any updates further on these guys?
Yeah, I think Donovan's playing tonight. I would be surprised if he didn't play tonight against New Orleans. All signs point to him playing. Spoke with him briefly as we walked out of the arena and toward the team bus for another story that I'm working on. And I said, "Welcome back." And he kind of gave me a wink. He was also wearing a jersey today at shoot around. And he was going through his normal game day routine as if he was a guy that was playing tonight against New Orleans. Beyond that, following shoot around today, both Max Struess and Evan Mobley were on the court getting a light workout in alongside some of the Cavs assistants and alongside some of the team training staff members. So I think that obviously is a positive sign. The Cavs are scheduled to have a practice here tomorrow in New Orleans before leaving for Houston. Their quote unquote off day. They're scheduled to practice in Houston as well. So it'll be interesting to see what level of activity these guys can do when it comes to practice, because it's just one thing to go out there on a court after shoot around and take a bunch of set shots and not really move all that much. It didn't seem like they were doing a lot of movement based activity. It was more continue to stay in shape, continue to stay in shooting form. So the sense that I get, Ethan, is that if Max Struess is comfortable with the treatment plan that the Cavs have, and the one thing that we know about Max is he hates being injured. I've asked him in the past about injuries, and he doesn't even like the term injured. If you remember, there was one of the games on the road earlier this year that he banged his knee.
I
It's
remember.
when
Yep, and he said he
against
wasn't injured.
Washington.
Yeah, and he said he wasn't injured.
Yeah, and after the game, I asked him about his injury, and he said, "I'm not injured." So he doesn't even like that term. He hates missing games. So I wouldn't be surprised if he tried to find a way to beat the timeline that the Cavs have put in place for him internally. And I wouldn't be surprised if Max just tries to force himself back on the court a little bit earlier than what the Cavs are anticipating at this point. So I'll never put that past him. But the sense that I get is that Max is probably going to be closer to the end of this month when he's actually going to come back from this injury. And then when it comes to Evan Mobley, he is a fast healer. Everybody knows that. He's already out of the boot. Like I said, he was going through a workout following shoot around today. Part of the reason why both these guys are on this trip and not Atlanta. The Atlanta trip was the second game of a back to back, and they were coming back to Cleveland after that. So it just didn't make a lot of sense for them to go there. They weren't going to benefit from that in any sort of way. This is a road trip. This is an extended road trip. There are practice times mixed in. There's team bonding that's going to happen on this as well. But when it comes to Evan, I never put anything past him when it comes to beating quote unquote timelines. But I get the sense that he's also relatively far away, and I would be surprised if he played against Houston or against Indiana on this trip. I think it's more likely that Evan is kind of middle of next week toward the end of next week. I don't get the sense that it's days for him when it comes to his return. Let's put it that way.
Second to last question, Chris.
Okay.
Isaac Okoro has improved significantly in the offense this year, and obviously he is one of the best, if not the best, perimeter defender in the NBA. This question is: has Isaac played his way out of the Cavs' price range?
He has not played out of their price range. I'll say he's played himself into a price range that they're going to be pretty queasy about. Let's put it that way. Look, I think it's all about, Ethan, how much of an appetite do they have in terms of going into the luxury tax? And I think what happens in this year's playoff run is going to play a part in that. Because what kind of team are you going to be going into next year? And if you're a team that's coming off a deeper playoff run, if you're a team that's getting out of the first round of the playoffs, it's easier for Chairman Dan Gilbert to justify going into the luxury tax because you're going into next season feeling like, okay, this is a contending team in the Eastern Conference. This is a team that is very close to the level of Boston, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia with Joel Embiid. So it makes sense for us to construct our roster and pay the kind of salaries that we'll have to pay for that kind of team. If you're going to compete in the NBA, chances are your roster is going to be expensive and you're going to have high price guys on it, and you're probably going to be into the luxury tax. So if the Cavs play well in the playoffs, it's easier for Dan Gilbert to justify that. If they flame out in the first round, then I think you could see some organizational changes, and then I think you could see Dan Gilbert a little bit more hesitant to go that direction. In saying all of that, he has shown in the past that for the right team, he's willing to cut the checks required. He's willing to give the front office as many resources as possible to build this thing the way that they feel it needs to be built. Everything that I continue to hear from my sources around the NBA that are trying to project what kind of contract Isaac is going to get this offseason is around 15 to 18 million annually. I mean, think about that. You already are paying Darius Garland, you're already paying Donovan Mitchell, Jared Allen $20 million. So I just think it puts the Cavs in a position, if they want to bring Isaac back and they value him, they understand how important he is. They've invested in him to this point. They see the development on the offensive end of the floor. He's no longer at this point an offensive liability. And beyond that, he's somebody who's probably going to make one of the two all defensive teams. That is valuable around the NBA, especially when you're talking about a guy who's 23 years old and probably has a little bit of offensive upside, a little bit of potential that's untapped at that end of the floor that another team or the Cavs could still pull out of him. That's the going rate for those kinds of players. And I just think it would put the Cavs in a decision making point where, what are we going to do about Karis LeVert? What are we going to do about Max Strus? And it's not to say that if Isaac comes back, if the Cavs match whatever offer he gets, or if they make him their own offer just to prevent other teams from potentially stealing him away, it's not to say that the Cavs can't afford Isaac and Max and Karras. It just becomes a little bit more difficult with the salary cap, and I think they would have to do some salary cap gymnastics, and they would have to determine, okay, can we keep all of these guys together, or do we have to offload one of the quote unquote expendable guys to make more room for Isaac and give us more optionality and flexibility when it comes to the salary cap? So it's just a harder decision. Isaac has done what he needed to do in terms of making the decision more difficult on the Cavs. But I don't sense that they just want to lose him for nothing. And him being a restricted free agent obviously protects them.
For someone who we thought could be dealt at the trade deadline as one of the only pieces that was maybe on the market, he has now risen to be a player that it would be hard to see this Cavs team without him, especially with the turbulent season with all the injuries that they've had to deal with. So, like you said, Chris, I think Isaac has done literally everything possible to make the decision hard on the Cavs because he's played well. And as an NBA player, that's all you can really do is make the decision difficult, make yourself
Yeah, and here's
indispensable.
the thing too. For the people that are saying, "Whoa, 15 to 18 million." Okay, in today's NBA, these are the guys that are making around that salary range. Reggie Bullock, Max Strus, obviously, Kentavious Caldwell Pope, Luke Kennard, Lou Dort, Karis LeVert, Kevin Herter, Rui Hachimura, PJ Washington, Davis Bertans, Harrison Barnes, Tim Hardaway Jr., Norman Powell, Duncan Robinson. That's the kind of range that I think Isaac is going to be in, because he's a similar caliber player to those guys, especially now that he has taken not an enormous leap offensively, but he has made strides offensively to the point where maybe he doesn't get played off the floor in a potential playoff series, provided he keeps making his outside shots, provided he keeps showing that growth on the offensive end where he threatens a defense in a different kind of way than what he did last year.
All right, Chris, we got to the final question of the podcast. And it's a
Yeah.
big one. And I think I'm going to have
Oh,
to
gee.
do a little bit of prep work for the fans to make sure that they understand everything going into this question. This one is from our guy, Matt, in Los Angeles. And I wanted to take some time on it. He said, "Hey, Chris, with the Cavaliers cycling between the second and third playoff seed, rank the matchups from worst to best regarding the Cavs' first round opponent possibilities." So, before we get into this, which teams will be in the play-in tournament if the regular season ended after games played on March 12th? For those who don't know, we are recording this at 1:51 in the afternoon on Wednesday. This is what it would look like before all the games played Wednesday night. In the Western
I think
Conference.
we should bookmark this. Remember when we bookmarked the one?
Yeah.
We wanted to hang on to it because we wanted to give it the space that it needed to go through it.
Okay.
I think this is a podcast by itself. I think this question is so in depth that it's a podcast of itself, personally. I want to give it the space that it requires. Is that cool?
Well, then let's bookmark it then.
Yeah, let's bookmark it.
You know the saying, y'all. If Chris says we're done, we're done. So, with all the information, all the subtext questions, all the subscribers that we got to today, thank you for giving us your questions. We could not have done this podcast without you. We can't do this podcast every day of the week without you guys, 5 days every week. The Wine and Gold Talk podcast. So, thank you. But remember, for people who are not already subscribers, to interact and become a Cavs insider with Chris and me, subscribe to Subtext. You can do so by signing up for a 14-day free trial or visiting cleveland.com/Cavs and clicking on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast, and the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.